Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 19. Unearthed. Holding the book open in front of him to gaze at the map as he walked, Samuel led the group forward, off of the road and into the woods. James stood behind him, viewing the map over his shoulder and watching his surroundings to ensure he knew where they were going. The sun had just dipped into the final quarter of its journey, painting the land with its final bright light before it would begin to dim into the night. The forest was quiet now, and Paisley and Sapphire watched the spaces between the trees alertly as they walked. The minutes passed by as they tread further and further into the forest, and it soon began to become clear that the path they had walked had been walked before. Paz leaned down to examine the numerous footprints left in the soil, all but smoothed out by the passing of time. "They're not fresh, at least," he said, turning to face the others with a cautious look. "But if someone's been here before, we'd best be on alert." They followed the map further, the footprints now helping to guide their way, until James suddenly stopped. He looked at the map quizzically, and then at his surroundings. "I think it's close," he said. "It must be." His gaze wandered around the woods until it finally came to rest on a small clearing not far away. Looking at the floor, it was clear to all that the footprints in the earth went the very same way. Samuel and James nodded to each other and began to approach. The clearing was small, but as they entered, it was notable nonetheless. The tracks, which were previously inconspicuous, came to a stop abrupt enough that all could notice. The ground was dark and smooth, a small circle in the trees where no grass and few roots protruded from the ground. At the edge of it too was a tall, dark and gnarled tree, leaning heavily to the side as if to point at the ground with its spindly branches. They all stood there at the clearing's edge, staring into the seemingly empty area. Past it, there was nothing but trees. In it, there was nothing at all. Samuel could feel the disappointment rising around him, but he stepped forward into the clearing, eyes scanning for something, anything. "This is definitely it," James said, peering over at the map once more. "Sorry, Samuel, but I think this one might be a bust." "No," Samuel insisted, before anyone could speak. There must be something here." He stepped across the clearing, looking in every conceivable direction in a visibly desperate search for anything of help. Paz pursed his lips and gave a look to his companions, then put his hands on his hips and gave the place another look. "We always knew the map might not lead anywhere," Sapphire reminded Samuel, stepping towards him sympathetically. "This doesn't mean we're finished." "No," Samuel demanded again, not even turning to face her. "The map is all we have. This is where it leads. Help me look." He walked to the edges of the clearing, feeling around in clumps of grass that grew between the roots of trees and checking behind each and every one. James stepped toward Paz, staring at Samuel sadly. "It'll start getting dark soon. We can't afford to do this." Paz sighed deeply, then turned to the others. "You all start moving out. I'll talk to him." James and Sapphire nodded glumly, while Aurora's sad gaze remained on Samuel as he continued in his fruitless efforts. Just as the others had turned away and Paisley stepped toward him to speak, Samuel finally found something. On his hands and knees, inspecting the ground, he stopped at a small patch of dirt near the farthest tree. It didn't look different. It barely felt different as he waved his hands through it. But something in him told him this was it. Frantically, he brushed his hand through the dirt again and again, chucking heaps of grainy earth to the side, until finally he touched something solid. I found it! He exclaimed, blowing with a relieved grin the last layer of soil from the surface of the wooden object he'd uncovered. The others all turned around and began to crowd around him. Underneath where he dug, a smooth wooden surface lay buried in the ground. It was clearly bigger than what they could see, but it seemed to be barely a few inches under. James, Sapphire, and Pasley all knelt down around him and began to brush away the soil around it until the edge finally came into view. It was a chest, a fairly small wooden chest buried in the earth. It took only a few moments to uncover the rest of it, after which the three strong fighters grabbed the edges and heaved the sunken object from the earth. Thin piles of dirt poured off the sides as they set it down with a knock right next to the rectangular hole from which it had been retrieved. The chest had a flat lid and was built of beautifully smooth oak. "This is it," Samuel said, suddenly very calm, as he slid his fingers along the seam of the lid. "Our very own buried treasure." It seemed to have no lock, nor mechanism by which to hold it shut. A simple box. With all waiting in anticipation, Samuel looked to each of his companions in turn, took a deep breath, and opened the chest. There was no creak as it was raised open. No satisfying click to signal their success. In fact, as the lid reached its apex and was allowed to weightily lower itself onto the other side, all present could see that the box was categorically, indisputably, entirely empty. Samuel's eyes traced every inch of the box, which was lightly coated in thin dirt that had seeped in through the edges. With every moment that passed, his expression grew more and more distressed, confusion, fear, and anguish building up behind his frantic eyes. It can't be. No one around him spoke, and their pitying glances, exchanged disorderly between the tightly packed group, did not reach Samuel's frozen eyes. It's empty," he whispered, confirming what they all knew to be true. His voice was tired, as if all the energy he had ever known just seeped from his body like the juices from a squashed fruit. Paz reached his hand towards Samuel's shoulder, but hesitated. He sighed, pushed himself to his feet, and nodded towards James and Sapphire. "I'll fetch the horses," he said. "Let's just give him a minute." The shadows around Samuel receded as those who had watched so eagerly stood and backed away from him, taking with them the last bit of warmth and comfort he was able to feel. He heard their footsteps crunching on the dirt and moving away, no doubt pitying him, no doubt annoyed at the wasted time, and without words to express towards him. Samuel's eyes, however, could not move from the box. He remained still for what felt like ages, until he saw a shadow approach him. He could tell by the baggy outline of the swaying cloak that it was Zircon, and for some reason, his eyes felt drawn towards that shadow, as if lured away from the tragic sight he had been so intent on. "An empty box," spat Samuel, still not turning around, as tears welled in his eyes. "Just like me. Just an empty goddamn box." Zircon knelt down beside Samuel, staring into the empty space within the crate and letting out a heavy sigh. "You know," he said, turning his head to Samuel, "there's no such thing as an empty box. Not really." "Oh yeah?" questioned Samuel, sniffling as he hurriedly wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his cloak. "What's in it then?" "Well," Zircon continued, audibly straining for an answer. You know, dust, maybe a dead insect. Look, what I'm trying to say is, don't give up, yeah? And what am I supposed to not give up on?" whimpered Samuel. "We've got nothing. This map was all we had, and now we've got nothing." Zircon sighed. "I know that feeling, kid. Trust me, that doesn't mean you can't still get by." His breathing getting heavier, Samuel grabbed the book that sat beside him and wrenched it open. The pages flew from side to side in a flurry, quickly parting to reveal the crumpled map that had seen them there. He snatched it out in a gripped fist and scrunched it up in both hands, furiously screaming in rage before he pushed himself to his feet, turned around and threw the crumpled ball with all his might. Zircon followed it calmly with his eyes as it flew through the air, coming to land gently a dozen feet behind him. He bit his lip and turned back towards Samuel. The boy was standing still, fists clenched and lips quivering. His whole body seemed to rise up and down with each heavy breath, and his face quickly collapsed into tears as he turned around and dropped back to the floor. He covered his face in his hands and began gently sobbing. Samuel felt hopeless and empty. He didn't even notice as Zircon stood up and began to walk away. He opened his eyes to peer down through his tear-blurred vision at the open book before him that now seemed so inconsequential, and the box just beyond it that now seemed to mirror him perfectly. "Nothing," he muttered to himself. But then he felt a hand come to rest on his shoulder. "I'm a swindler, you know," he heard, jolting up slightly from the touch. "Or at least I used to be." Zircon's voice sounded so confident that Samuel could suddenly focus on nothing else. He opened his eyes gently and turned to face him. "Point is," Zircon continued, "I lived on making something from nothing." Zircon's hand reached out, opening to reveal the screwed-up map, now covered in a light layer of dirt. Samuel looked up at him, the tears in his face reflecting the pale light of the evening far too much, and hesitantly he reached out to take it. Zircon repeated again to assure him. "There's no such thing as an empty box." Samuel sniffed again, rubbing his sleeve hard across his face in an attempt to remove the remaining tears. He brought the screwed-up chunk to his lap and slowly pulled the edges until the parchment unravelled itself. To his unexpressed surprise, it didn't noticeably look any different. He placed it slowly and calmly against the open page of his book and pressed his hands against it, flattening it out. Then he stared at it. "Do you think you're ready to go, Samuel?" Pasley called softly, approaching him again with the others trailing behind. I think I understand," said Samuel. Pasley paused. "Understand what?" I've been here before. I should have realised it sooner." As Samuel rose to his feet, the others remained silent, the forest keeping quiet for just a moment. "The footprints, they were all mine." Zircon stood up as well and stepped closer to Samuel, staring over his shoulder with a confused expression on his face. "Well, that can't be right. I thought you wrote down everything in your book." "He's right," James agreed. "There's no way you could have come here before and still thought that map was important." "But it is important," said Samuel. There was a moment of silence. Confused and concerned glances were exchanged between the others, but Zircon appeared the most confused of them all. "Zircon was right," Samuel continued. I said it myself before. Without this map, I have no hope. Without this map, I lose everything. All along, this is all I've had to keep me going. Zircon remained silent, tilting his head in thought. This is all I have, finished Samuel. Chasing nothing. The boy took a deep breath and slowly pushed himself to his feet, turning to view the forest around him. What difference does it make if I keep coming back to look in an empty box? At least it's a direction, isn't it? Sapphire looked on, intrigued and worried. What are you saying? I ripped the map out, explained Samuel, and I put it back on purpose. I have every time, because without it, I have no reason to go on. Zircon rose to his feet, face heavy in thought, as he remained beside Samuel. It was simply a ploy, Samuel continued. A lure to give me hope, to get me up in the morning, knowing that by the time I worked out it was all a lie, it would be far too late to go back to sleep, far too late to give up. He turned to Zircon again, his face no longer tear-stricken, nor showing signs of sadness or anger. He simply looked empty. I'll leave the map in the book, he said, and I'll keep coming back. Keep coming and coming until the forgotten makes it impossible to do even that. You can't be sure of that, said Sapphire, the sadness in her eyes leaving her words unconvincing. Samuel met her eyes. Can't I? Nothing is going to change. If it could, things wouldn't be like this. I wouldn't have been through this loop again and again, and I wouldn't have to lie to myself just to keep from giving up. You were right in the end. The box isn't empty. It's filled with buried hope. Not just from me, but from all of the Samuels. I only wish that some of it could be real. Zircon took a deep breath and put his hands in his pockets, stepping to stand in line with Samuel and following his gaze upwards into the trees. A long moment of silence followed. Nobody present quite sure what to say. Nobody, it seemed, except for Zircon. It is real, Samuel, he told him. Because if you just keep on digging and digging, eventually you're bound to find treasure. The mood had been sombre as the group had left the small clearing, wandering vaguely northwards in an effort to find somewhere safe to camp. The sky had darkened dramatically, and the forest was all but silent, save for the rustling of the plants beneath them and the occasional call of a night owl. Between the low, shadowy leaves of the undergrowth, two small, beady eyes watched them secretly from the darkness. When the last slivers of twilight began to fade from the sky, Pasley raised his palm to signal the group to stop, and nodded to James and Sapphire. They nodded back in understanding, and promptly went off to gather wood for a fire. Aurora shivered in the cold night air, clutching her shoulders in an attempt to keep warm as she lowered herself to sit comfortably beside the trunk of a nearby tree. Paz sat beside her and gave her a weak smile. "You'll get used to the cold eventually," he remarked. "There comes a point where it just can't bother you anymore." As James returned with a bundle of spindly drywood, he dumped it all on a pile vaguely between everyone present, then stiffly jogged over to the horses and rustled around in one of the packs for a few seconds, pulling out a small tinderbox He stepped calmly to the pile and knelt beside it, eventually producing a spark that caught some of the kindling laid out. The embers spread quickly, creating a small yet intense cast of red-hot light that contrasted hugely against the darkness of the night around them. Sapphire returned with a dozen larger sticks, which she placed into the sides of the blaze carefully. It soon grew larger, casting huge rising shadows against the trunks of the surrounding trees. While the area slowly began to embrace the warmth of the blaze, Samuel sat nearby on his bedroll, legs crossed and book laying open on his lap. "So, if this eye is the cause of all this," Zircon said from beside him, warming his hands on the now crackling fire, "couldn't you just, destroy it?" "If only it were that easy," sighed Samuel in response. "The eye is fueled by incredibly powerful magic, just like the Forgotten. There's no way it could be destroyed by anything less, and none of us are capable of even basic magic." "Well, she's using the memories inside to protect herself, right?" continued Zircon's ponderings, his brow furrowed in thought. "Why don't we just take the memories out of the eye so that she can't use it?" Samuel tilted his head towards Zircon, with an exhausted look upon his face. "It's not that simple. Memories can't just exist. They need minds to contain them." Zircon stared back at him. "So? We just take them out of there and into our own heads?" Samuel shook his head and breathed out exhaustedly. "There are thousands of lifetimes worth of memories in here. To take all that and put it into one person, well, I can't imagine what that would do to you." Zircon stared down at the ground. "Do you think it would kill you?" "I think death would be the bare minimum," Samuel answered. "And even if someone were to make that sacrifice, she could just fill it back up again. It would take time, sure, but there's nobody to stop her." "We have the eye, though, right?" Zircon argued. "Couldn't we just hold it up in front of her face and steal her memories, just like she did to me?" "You're welcome to try," replied Samuel. Shuffling around in his sitting position, Zircon narrowed one eye in heavy thought. "Okay," he considered. "What if we filled it up with too many memories?" Samuel didn't even look up. Zircon put his hands behind his head and leaned back on his bedroll, blowing air out through his mouth. "I can see why you've been stuck on this so long." "Are you all right?" Pasley asked Aurora, watching her as she stared into the distance. "You've seemed a bit distracted." Aurora shrugged and held her gaze. "I'm fine." "Are you sure?" asked Pasley again. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Aurora let out a deep sigh and shook her head sadly. "Have you ever been lied to?" she asked. "Like, really badly?" Pasley nodded his head slowly. "I think we all have, at some point." Aurora turned to face him again, confliction on her face. "Zircon lied to me. He isn't who he said he was. I don't feel like I even know him anymore." Paz gave her a sympathetic smile and nodded. "You don't seem very surprised." "He may have told me," Paz replied, forcing a guilty smile. "The night we first met." Aurora shook her head at him in disbelief, then spun around to face the fire. "Is nobody being honest with me anymore?" "I'm sorry, Aurora," Paz said, "but he did say he was going to tell you, and to his credit, he did." "Only because I forced it out of him," Aurora spat. "And anyway, that wasn't all that he did." Pasley looked to her, listening for her to continue. Aurora gave him a sideways glance, looking slightly guilty herself. He was planning to steal back the eye and sell it. He wanted me to go with him. I should have told you what he was planning, but I still didn't feel like I could do that to him. I understand, Pasley replied, still a gentle smile upon his face. It's hard to hurt people you care about, even if they're in the wrong. I don't want to care about him, though, sighed Aurora. He's a liar and a thief. Pasley tilted his head. Are you absolutely sure of that? What? Of course, Aurora exclaimed. He explicitly told me he planned to steal the eye. Pasley turned his head to look at Zircon, where he shuffled around by the fire beside Samuel. He's still here, though, isn't he? Aurora scoffed. He's here because he wants the eye. Paz raised an eyebrow at her. Are you certain? He's had plenty of opportunities to try and take it. If you ask me, I'd say it's more likely he's here because of you. Aurora slowly looked over to where Zircon sat, and as he turned his head, he caught her gaze for just a moment. He held it for only a second before turning away again. Even if that was true, Aurora began, there's no way you can trust him around the eye. I know what he's like now. Even if he did try to steal the eye, there's no way he'd get past us, Pasley said. You don't need to worry about that. The important thing is, do you want to give him the benefit of the doubt? Aurora looked uncertainly toward the ground. Look, Pasley began, the way I see it, you have two choices here. You can either sit here and hold back your feelings until he thinks you hate him and leaves forever, or you can give him another chance and see where it leads you. Sometimes it's when we have the least that we feel we have the most to lose. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. Not as long as you're with us. Aurora glowered sadly at the ground. I still don't understand how he could be so callous. Pasley joined her in staring at the ground, but tilted his head slightly. Nobody changes until they find a reason to be better, he told her. Do you really think he can change? Aurora replied. Pasley nodded, smiling gently. I think a good thing could change us all for the better. Are you sure you've read the whole of the book? Zircon asked Samuel. Could there be a secret solution to all our problems hidden between the pages? Samuel wasn't looking at the book anymore. His gaze seemed to be drawn into the darkness of the woods beside them, as if staring into the abyss itself. Samuel? There is no solution, Samuel finally replied, his voice quiet and muttery. Not now, and not ever. Well, that's obviously not true, replied Zircon. You've been through this dozens of times, and yet you've never had this eye before. Who's to say there's not more to discover? Samuel's eyes returned to his book, but his empty expression had taken on a quizzical form. He stared downwards heavily, eyebrows furrowed, hard, as if deep in thoughts he didn't want to have. Jade is a powerful sorceress who's lived lifetimes longer than any of us can imagine, he said. She has untold magical potential and an army of creatures at her beck and call. Zircon looked at him, confused. What are you getting at? My point is, Samuel continued, I'm nobody, and I found her easily. His expression turned less and less quizzical as he slowly turned towards Zircon, shifting bit by bit until he stared through him with a look of pure worry. So how in the hell could she have not found me